Minimum wage is often presented as a benevolent effort to help low-income workers. But for more than a century, it has produced outcomes starkly at odds with its professed goals. It is not just an economic policy, but rather a statement on our society's underlying assumptions about human freedom, responsibility, and the proper limits of government power. When examined honestly, minimum wage reveals an unsettling truth. Symbolic compassion can produce actual misery, and the people paying the highest price are those least able to bear it. Let's look at how this policy originated. The popular narrative claims the minimum wage was created to raise worker incomes, but the historical record tells a very different story, one so politically inconvenient that it has been almost entirely erased from public discussion. In the early 20th century, progressive-era reformers in the United States, Canada, and Australia supported minimum wage laws explicitly as a tool to exclude undesired workers from the labor market. These undesired workers were usually minorities, immigrants, women, or the poor. The logic was simple. If an employer could hire a black laborer, an immigrant, or a woman for less than the wage demanded by unionized white men, then these groups would remain competitive. A wage floor was designed to make that competition illegal. The intention was not hidden. Economists and policymakers wrote openly about the need to prevent inferior workers from undercutting others by offering to work for lower pay. Early advocates were quite clear that raising the cost of hiring low-skill workers would reduce their employment, and they supported the legislation precisely for this reason. Milton Friedman noted bluntly, "The minimum wage law is most properly described as a law saying employers must discriminate against people with low skills." Walter E. Williams went even further, calling it one of the few government policies whose historical intent and modern consequences aligned perfectly. It reduced employment among low-skill workers. That is the origin of the minimum wage, a policy born not of generosity, but of exclusion, not of uplift, but of restriction. A minimum wage is not merely an economic regulation, it is a legal prohibition. It forbids consenting adults from entering into a work agreement that both find mutually beneficial. If a young person wishes to work for $10 an hour to gain experience, and an employer wishes to hire him at that wage, that transaction is outlawed. The assumption behind such a law is that individuals do not know what is in their best interest and that government operatives do. In a free society, third parties should not dictate terms for people whose circumstances and incentives they do not share, do not understand, and cannot possibly know individual motivations. The paternalistic presumptions of minimum wage should be an affront to a free people. Williams made the moral point even more directly. If you do not own your labor, if you are not free to sell it on terms you choose, then someone else owns part of you. Minimum wage laws obliterate a core principle of a free society, the right of peaceful individuals to make voluntary arrangements without political interference. A policy that forcibly restricts human freedom has no claim to moral superiority. The most basic lesson of economics, so often ignored in political rhetoric, is that price controls create surpluses or shortages. A minimum wage is a price floor. When imposed above the value a worker can produce, it does not raise that worker's productivity. It simply makes it illegal to employ him. Employers do not pay wages out of kindness. They pay wages out of revenue generated by the worker's output. If a law requires an employer to pay $20 per hour for labor worth $12 per hour, the employer will not hire that worker. There is no mystery in this, there is only arithmetic. When government mandates wages that exceed a worker's productivity, the worker is priced out of the job market entirely. The groups most harmed are those with limited skills, often teenagers, minorities, immigrants with limited English, individuals with poor schooling, and anyone needing a first step onto the employment ladder. These workers do not need a law declaring their labor to be more valuable than it is. They need the opportunity to gain skills and experience so their productivity, and thus their wages, can rise naturally. Minimum wage laws deny them that opportunity. One of the great ironies of minimum wage policy is that it kills precisely the jobs that build the foundations for success. First jobs are not primarily about income. They are about experience, habits, discipline, and the development of employability. Minimum wage has led employers to eliminate entry-level positions, replace labor with automation, combine multiple low-skill roles into a single high-skill position, or simply ask existing workers to do more. The gas station attendant, the grocery bagger, the usher, the dishwasher, the clerk, positions once filled by teenagers and those entering the workforce for the first time, have quietly disappeared over the decades. Not because society no longer needs these services, but because it is no longer legal to hire inexperienced workers at wages that reflect their initial level of productivity. Like many government interventions, the minimum wage creates a comforting illusion. Consumers and voters see the wage mandated by law. They do not see the jobs that never appear, the hours that are cut, the businesses that do not open, or the services that vanish. The winners are the higher productivity workers who keep their jobs. The losers are the lower productivity workers who are pushed out of the labor market entirely. Society pays in other ways as well. When labor becomes more expensive by law, prices rise, service options shrink, small businesses struggle or close, automation accelerates, and economic mobility slows. Every additional restriction on voluntary exchange reduces the range of choices available to individuals. A society does not lose its freedom all at once. It loses it regulation by regulation, each wrapped in the language of noble intentions. In time, citizens become less free, not because freedom was taken from them violently, but because it was regulated away politely. Minimum wage laws allow politicians to appear compassionate while shifting the costs onto the invisible, the inexperienced, and the politically powerless. The policy was born in exclusion, survives through misunderstanding, and persists because its victims lack a voice. Minimum wage laws do not uplift the poor. They prohibit the poor from helping themselves. They do not expand opportunity. They ration it. They do not raise productivity. They merely outlaw employment for those whose productivity is too low. Most of all, the minimum wage erodes one of the central pillars of a free society, the right of individuals to make voluntary arrangements that benefit both parties. When the state dictates the terms of peaceful exchange, liberty gives way to symbolism, and compassion becomes something performed rather than practiced. A society serious about opportunity would not criminalize the first rung of the economic ladder. It would widen the path upward, not block it with good intentions and rigid mandates.